There's this idea I see presented in the community that a major weakness of Souls games is that they lack difficulty options. The argument conventionally follows the logic that without allowing the player to set difficulty to their comfort level, it can make it less accessible to new or otherwise lower skill players and hurt overall audience engagement. So, with the impending release of Elden Ring Tarnished Edition, let's talk about some pros and cons of adding such an option and, if we're feeling bold, expand the conversation to cover all of FromSoft's catalog and maybe even games as a whole. First off, we should consider the target audience of the Tarnished Edition and the Switch 2, as it seems the primary reason the Tarnished Edition exists is the Switch 2. My feeling is that this is a release intended to offer Elden Ring to a more casual audience, given the Switch 2's focus on portability over performance and Nintendo's history as a family-first developer. I also have no doubt it is a gesture of goodwill, given the two companies' collaboration on the Duskbloods and an opportunity to make an easy buck. But basically, the only people I know buying a Switch 2 are doing so for exclusive titles unavailable on stronger platforms, or are literal children whose eyes have yet to open. That may or may not be the case for you, but I don't think it's all that controversial to see the Switch 2 as a gaming console compromise rather than a competitor to, say, PC or PlayStation. My point is, if there ever were an audience who might appreciate difficulty options, I suspect the Switch 2 would be a good place to find them. With that in mind, should FromSoft take the opportunity to cater to a not uncommon audience request? Like all things in life, it depends. When we say difficulty options, what we're talking about is the ability to adjust how tough a game is via a menu or other interface, rather than taking advantage of in-game mechanics to make the game easier or harder. You're having a bad time fighting a boss, turn the difficulty setting down to easy or novice or whatever, and now you can beat them. Maybe you can adjust it on the fly, maybe it's locked in per playthrough. And there's actually a lot of ways to adjust difficulty, so it's hard to give a universal yes or no. Sometimes difficulty adjustments mean changing health and damage values, other times it means changing enemy tactics and placement. From Software has actually included difficulty options in their games in one way or another already. They include a New Game Plus mode where you can just play the game again, but all enemies have more health and deal more damage, and when FromSoft cares enough, the game gets a little more complicated with enemy variety and placement. Dark Souls 2 is famous for having the most interesting New Game Plus experience because it added new invading NPC phantoms, changed some item drops, and added some boss interactions, among other small changes. And beyond New Game Plus, Dark Souls 2 also included the Company of Champions, which outright gives enemies more damage while they take less, along with removing the finite respawn limit of all standard foes. And it disables summoning while retaining invasions. Just a built-in hard mode available in the starting area. This type of difficulty adjustment is one I generally enjoy. I love restricted playthroughs of games where you can't level up or use conventional methods to beat the game, and have to rely on weird exploits or just play incredibly well to win. These options can be self-imposed or supported in-game, and I think both are perfectly valid. Where I find the topic of difficulty settings most contentious, however, is when people are asking for an easy mode. On the surface, it is easy to see the request as someone simply wanting to beat the game and not have to try very hard or get good at it. They may not care about the intended challenge and just want to experience the story and maybe a power fantasy while they're at it. This is something I see as extremely prevalent in the Elder Scrolls series, games with pretty bland combat but comparatively strong narratives. Why shouldn't you just set everything to the lowest difficulty if you don't enjoy the combat? Of course, Souls games are nothing like Elder Scrolls in this regard. Souls combat is the game, and the narrative is woven throughout. But despite the differences, I don't believe difficulty should be handled any differently between them because it matters all the same. And before we go any further, let me clarify that I am not against games being easy or accessible. What I'm against is games being subservient to the player's whims. What do I mean by that? If you're playing a game, literally any game, It has obstacles and rules to dictate how you can overcome them. Want to open this door? Find a key. Where's the key? Behind a boss. You need to defeat the boss to get the key. Difficulty is how hard it is to do that sequence. If you, as the player, can adjust that difficulty, it changes the integrity of not only that encounter, but the entire game. At what point is easy too easy? At what point is hard too hard? Every player has a different skill level and will find the game more or less challenging based on their own abilities. You might look at that and say, hey, that's exactly why we need difficulty options. And while that's wrong, it's not because you're arguing in bad faith. See, the issue with difficulty is a matter of perspective. If you look at difficulty as something the player should determine, then you might reasonably come to the conclusion that the game's difficulty exists to accommodate the player. But that is not what difficulty is for, or rather, not what it should be for. Difficulty accommodates the game. Games should not challenge us in the way we wish to be challenged. That's baby stuff. Sure, we're all busy and have better things to do than smack our heads against the same boss for hours on end, but at the same time, it is only because the boss requires such effort that the fight has meaning, that the boss is the boss. The challenge is the game. Now, I know some of you might find that elitist or annoying, and you'd be right to wish me a slow and painful death, but let's try a thought exercise. If you can't beat a game at its standard difficulty, and you need to lower it to win, how is that any different from cheating? Because the game allows it, right? That's the line. A way to change the challenge level that is sanctioned by the developer. Loading up Cheat Engine and increasing your damage by 50% would be cheating, but choosing an easy mode that gives all enemies 50% less health wouldn't be. You can extrapolate the semantics as far as you'd like, but the fact remains. Lowering difficulty via options performs the same core functions as cheating does. A developer might carefully cater difficulty options better than cheating would, but being realistic means acknowledging that difficulty sliders do little more than move numbers up and down while removing obstacles. For example, a big issue I have with survival crafting games is how modular their difficulty is. Valheim says I can't bring ore through portals, but that's just a setting. If I'm especially annoyed at how long it takes me to retrieve iron from the swamp and get it back to my forge, then I'd be foolish not to simply allow myself the convenience of teleportation to avoid wasting my very limited time. But once I do that, I've ruined something possibly fundamental to the game's design. It's a matter of opinion, I'm sure, but without having to load ore onto my boat and sail back to the base with the risk of losing it all, gathering the ore is just a chore. At that point, why not just spawn myself in all the ore I need to make the equipment I want? What's the difference if I gather 1 ore or 1,000 beyond the time required? There's no end to that line of convenience-first reasoning, and it requires a level of self-awareness and discipline to draw a line that works best for you without trivializing a game in the name of saving time. Some games may revel in the variety they offer to players, but what good is a survival crafting game if neither survival nor crafting is a challenge? And there is an argument to be made in favor of catering to new players. Maybe you want to play your favorite game with a partner who isn't very experienced in the genre and is easily intimidated by difficulty. By lowering the settings to their comfort, you might enjoy the game more together. But by changing the difficulty, you are changing the experience in a way that may well jeopardize them ever getting comfortable with a more challenging environment. And not only that, but you could lose the very experience you're trying to share. Maybe that's what works best for you, but I have never once appreciated a game for conforming to my expectations. Whenever a game allows me to trivialize an encounter, all it's really doing is getting out of my way and, in the process, denying me a real experience. That might sound ridiculous, but ask yourself, why are you playing this game? I have to imagine most people are playing games to experience gameplay. The difficulty of that gameplay has a major impact on how it's experienced. Drawing our attention back to FromSoft, why do people like these games so much? Is it because they conform to player expectations, or because they force players to conform to the game's expectations? Obviously, it's the latter, and with good reason. Games, as uniquely interactive media, can offer us more multi-layered and complex experiences. They can make us better than we were before. You go into a game with no idea how to play, and if you persevere, you come out the other side better at that game, and probably at least a little better at problem solving. If you're receptive to art, you've likely grown as a person by virtue of the experience. And nothing I've said so far refutes that some people will find better value in different levels of difficulty, and that having an option to adjust it only widens accessibility. If you like the game easier, you can make it easier, just as someone who prefers a challenge can choose the challenge. But where I want to push back on that idea is in the integrity of the game itself. Unless the developer has carefully considered all options and tailored them to each setting, you're going to change the experience in unknown and unserious ways. Maybe for the better, maybe for the worse, but all at the expense of an artistic expression. By choosing a path and sticking to it, the game can be built around a precise and shared experience intended for all players, where that expression can be imparted and felt across the spectrum. And shared experiences matter. If my favorite movie is The Raid and I suggest it to you, and you came back after watching a YouTube review and said you didn't like it, I'd drop kick you in the chest like Mad Dog. Shared experiences build community and are required for mutual understanding. It's literally character building, and I cannot fathom why we would want to get away from it in an RPG. And if we look at Elden Ring, every decision made by the developer already caters to players of every skill level. If you're a hardened veteran who has already gotten good, then you can steamroll many of the encounters with minimal prep. If you're a noob who can't dodge to save their life, you can overprep to your heart's content. You can summon allies and shoot lasers from behind the wall of friendship. A huge part of the game is learning how you can make it easier for yourself, and that is a time-honored tradition of Souls design. Adding a difficulty slider trivializes that design in a way that gives nothing back to the player. The bosses aren't hard because they want you to have a bad time, they're hard because they represent the game world and exist to teach you how to be better at navigating it. It being a world that wants you to have a bad time, admittedly, but the point remains. If you can't learn Margit's patterns, you shouldn't move past him by looking up some one-shot guide and then summoning someone else to do it for you. You should learn to read his patterns because it's going to come up a lot. It's like the whole point of the game. If summoning is a useful tool to you, then that's great and you should take full advantage. Just remember that it's called cooperation because you're working together, not so someone else can carry your weight. And don't get me wrong, every player should be able to play the game however they want. Self-determination is of absolute importance. Where I'm drawing the line is at developers catering to the player in that way, meeting them where they are instead of asking them to go the distance. Games should set the goal, and players should reach it. So should Elden Ring Tarnished Edition, or any game, add difficulty options? Absolutely not. Difficulty isn't as trivial as the settings menu and shouldn't be treated as such. If the game is meant to be hard, it should stay hard. If it needs to take a long time to beat, it should take a long time. Good art asks something of its audience, great art demands it. I'd love to know your take on this. Is it really such a big deal to let people coast through games if that's what makes them happy? Am I blowing it out of proportion in an attempt to retain a misplaced sense of self-worth and artistic integrity? Or am I completely justified in this and all other assertions? I want to know what you think, so think your thoughts aloud in the comments. I'm feeling especially dialectic these days. And sorry I haven't been posting more regularly, but things have been in a bit of a lull in the world of Souls games, as Night Rain just hasn't held my interest. Hopefully I'll feel more inspired in the coming weeks, but just know that I am always here, lurking just beneath the waves. I really appreciate the ongoing support, and am ever grateful to be a part of this community. Like the video if you think games should be so hard no one can beat them, dislike it if you think all games should just be movies, and subscribe to help unionize the workplace that is YouTube. Until next time, thank you for watching.